Hi everyone, welcome back to the weekly study. I'm glad that you're joining with me today for some study and reflection as we continue with our exploration of the book of Genesis. We find ourselves in the midst of chapter 29 of Genesis. A little background before we jump into what we'll be studying today. Chapter 29 focuses and begins the life of Jacob. Jacob, again, who is on the run, who has cleverly, tricksterly, conniving person who's taken that birthright. Perhaps it was rightfully his, perhaps not, but we've discussed that weeks and weeks and weeks ago. But now he's on the run. He is alone, and he is searching for a family, searching for a wife. And remember, first there's the dream with the ladder, then comes the scene at the well where he meets Rachel, and he falls in love with her, and knows that she is the right woman. She comes from the right lineage, and that's what's confirmed what we studied in the middle of chapter 29 last week. And he finally meets Lavan, or Laban, his uncle, and begins to have that conversation with him, settling in his home, and then agrees to work for 7 years in order to marry Rachel. So that is where our story picks up today. Jacob, having worked the 7 years, remember that they seemed like just a few days in his eyes. And now he is ready to marry Rachel, and that's where our story will begin today, and we'll continue with chapter 29. So stay with us as we read through the next chunk of verses, and then offer some commentary and reflection. Then Jacob said to Lavan, "Give me my wife, for my time is fulfilled, that I may cohabit with her." And Lavan gathered all the people of the place and made a feast. When evening came, he took his daughter Leah, and brought her to him, and he cohabited with her. Lavan had given his maidservant Zilpah to his daughter Leah as her maid. When morning came, there was Leah. So he said to Lavan, "What is it that you have done to me? I was in your service for Rachel. Why did you deceive me?" He said, "It is not the practice in our place to marry off the younger before the older. Wait until the bridal week of this one is over, and I will give you that one too, provided you serve me another 7 years. Jacob did so. He waited out the bridal week of the one, and then he gave him his daughter Rachel as wife. Lavan had given his maidservant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her maid. And Jacob cohabited with Rachel also. Indeed, he loved Rachel more than Leah, and he served him another 7 years. So, with verse 21, we learn that Jacob is the one who says to Lavan, just a note here, I'm going to pronounce his name as Lavan, because that's how the Hebrew is pronounced, but perhaps you are familiar with him being called Laban, but those are the same people. Jacob approaches Lavan and says, "My time's up. I have served you for 7 years." When you pause and think about that, it shouldn't be Jacob's responsibility to let Lavan know about that, right? It's not the worker's responsibility to tell the owner or the master what they've agreed upon. It should be the master or the owner who says, "Hey, I've noticed what you've worked, and here is what you're kind of given to you." So it already, again, as we already talked about last week, when we meet Lavan, there's just something a bit under the surface, or not even so under the surface, that we notice that he's not a get-along person. He's not a pleasant person. He's not one who's interested in connection with Jacob, but interested in exploiting him as much as possible. And so Jacob says, "Hey, time's up. I'm interested, we'd agreed upon that after 7 years of work, I would be able to marry Rachel. And so he believes that it should be time. And so the trickery continues. Lavan gathers all the people and makes a feast, so the wedding feast is going to happen. Evening comes, and Lavan takes his daughter Leah and brings her to Jacob. And Jacob sleeps with her. Lavan had also given a maidservant Zilpah, who we'll learn about a little bit later, to Leah as a maid. And then the morning comes, and there was Leah. And Jacob kind of wakes up from the bed, the morning, opens up the covers, or draws the covers, opens up the shades, and says, "Wait," turns on the light, so to speak, and says, "Wait, what's going on? I thought I had slept with and married Rachel. Apparently, it's been Leah." And he says to Lavan, "What is this? What is this you have done to me? Why have you done this to me? I was working for Rachel. Why did you deceive me?" So it's really, I think we could just pause here to reflect a little bit. First, how does it take Jacob up until the morning time to realize that it was Leah and not Rachel? Right? You would think he would know that, right? Even if it's nighttime, even if it's dark, shouldn't he know the woman that he's been longing after and pining after? Perhaps, as one commentator says, is that perhaps this shows just the drive of how far your kind of lust can drive you towards. What we could, if we want to offer a critique of Jacob, we could say that really he was only drawn to Rachel for her looks. Remember, he saw how beautiful she was. He cried. Remember back at the scene at the well, he kisses her. There's kind of this immediate attraction. And perhaps this is coming to teach us that Jacob didn't really get to know Rachel that well. And even when it was a different woman that was in his midst, he could not tell. Now, also what this leaves us is, what is Jacob and Leah's relationship going to be like? Right? You can imagine this woman who is the sister of Rachel, who is disregarded even though she's the elder, and then is given and kind of, I imagine she's aware of the fact that Jacob longs for Rachel, but it's her father's decision to give her to Jacob. So what does she feel like? What is their relationship like? Jacob outwardly saying that he wants her sister and not her. So let's just keep that in mind as we read through the story, to just kind of check in, what is their relationship going to be like? I imagine it's already rocky at this point, that they don't have this kind of connection. And then one more thing just to note is the trickery, right? Jacob is the trickster, right? That's how we started our intro, is always a reminder of Jacob who deceived his father Isaac, right? The dim-sighted Isaac. He, along with his mother Rebekah, helped in order to trick him, to give him the birthright. And now he is tricked in the night. In the night, in the dark time, in the darkness when he cannot see, it's his uncle who tricks him about his uncle's daughters. And now kind of it's he gets a measure for measure. What he did in terms of tricking is now given back to him. So I think that's a kind of an interesting thing to think about. And just furthermore, even though Isaac was tricked back in a couple of chapters ago, Isaac relied on his hearing. Isaac said, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. He relied on his hearing or on his sense of touching. And yet Jacob doesn't seem to rely on that in this situation. So Jacob gives this kind of is frustrated and angry with Lavan. And how does Lavan respond? It's not the practice of our place to marry off the younger before the older. At first, it can kind of seem that Lavan, instead of giving Jacob a personal response, he's kind of protecting himself with kind of a communal standards. Instead of saying, I'm in it. I'm not doing this. This is not how it works. I'm not giving into your demands. But he kind of hides himself or protects himself in some ways behind what the communal standards are. Perhaps we can read between the lines. And Lavan, knowing what Jacob's story is, remember they met when we talked about last week, and Jacob tells Lavan all that has happened. So Lavan says, hey, this is actually, you deserve this as well. The customs of the land, the customs of families are that, remember, the younger doesn't come before the older. Jacob, right? You are the younger. You're not supposed to come before the older, Esau. So too in this case, the younger, Rachel, is not supposed to come before Leah, the older. And so that's kind of maybe a way of Lavan kind of digging in to Jacob, pouring a little bit of salt on the wound, so to speak. But what he does say is that wait until this bridal week is over, and I will give you Rachel to you, and then you've got to work for another 7 years. So that can seem kind of drastic or harsh, but I guess Jacob doesn't really have a choice. He doesn't really have any power in this, and if he really wants Rachel, he just has to listen to Lavan and take that and take the deal. And so Jacob does so, and he is able to then marry Rachel. And it still says, as we conclude with verse 30, that Jacob continues to love Rachel more than Leah. And so next week we'll pick up with the birth, the beginning of as Leah begins to give birth, and the children that will come, and learning about Rachel, and then the tensions that will exist between Jacob and Leah and Rachel, which are not surprising given what we've already studied so far. So thank you for joining me. I hope you have been enjoying these studies so far, and we'll continue and pick up with the end of chapter 29 next week, and probably make our way into chapter 30 as well. All right, have a great day, everyone.